Hi, this is Misha, and today we thought we'd take a closer look at this gun here. This is the Argentinian HAFDASA. It's an acronym abbreviation, much longer name, Hispano, Sousa, yeah, anyway. Ballester-Molina pistol. Quite an interesting gun, often overlooked today. It was in production from the late 30s through the early 50s, and in Argentinian military service through at least the 1970s. This is a 45 caliber, 45 ACP, single action, manual safety, loosely based on the 1911. For comparison, I have the Spanish Star. Now this is a Model B Super, but for today's purposes it can be a Model A or whatever we need. And the gun that served alongside the Ballester-Molina, the Argentinian production Model 1927 Systema Colt. Now this we have a video separate on, so check that out for more details. But essentially this was a licensed production version of the 1911A1. The first ones were built in America by Colt, and later production would be undertaken in Argentina. First at the Esteban Luca factory, later at the F.M.A.P. Domingo Matthew factory in Rosario. And in total they would have about 112,000 of these in military service, and these were in production from the late 20s through about 1966. However, the 1927 was reasonably expensive to mass produce, and in the 1930s the Argentinian military was really hoping to get a gun of similar quality, same features, but they could be produced cheaper and easier. And a company in Argentina known as Hispano or HAFDASA, who had already been well known and respected for manufacturing engines and other mechanical components, and was a military contractor, decided to start taking a look at the original 1911 in Argentinian military service known as the Model 1916, and trying to find ways to streamline it for mass production, basically to simplify it. And it became named after the two owners of the company, Mr. Ballester and Molina. Really, work began by 1937, and by 1938 they had guns ready to go, and these were quickly adopted by the Argentinian military. So what did they do here? Well, it's basically a 1911 in a lot of ways. It's certainly a Browning style gun. We have a tipping barrel, a locked breech, single action only, 7-round mag, wood grips, slide hold back, has kind of the arched mainspring housing of the A1, but if you notice we have some simplifications. We don't have a grip safety, and this is all a piece with the frame, so that's quite easier, simpler to machine. We have a larger beaver tail. This whole gun's a little larger, a little bulkier, not by much, but it's a little bit longer, a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker. This allowed a little less precise machining, and also it allowed for different grades of steel. The thicker you use metal, the less precise you have to machine things. We have very coarse slide serrations. These actually remind me a lot of on the Tokarev, the TT-33. I have a pretty simplified hammer system with simple lines as opposed to checkering. Point this at you. The front's pretty well 1911. Very standard sights, fixed sights. And the trigger is why I actually brought out the Star. Instead of using the sliding trigger of the 1911. This uses a simpler pivoting trigger on a pin. And this was taken from the Spanish Star series. Here. In fact, the whole system here, we have a single piece here without the grip safety. We have the same thumb safety here. The whole trigger frame system is pretty well inspired by the Star. So those are the two major influences, the Colt 1911 and the Star, which would have been the Model A or the Model B, depending on the caliber at the time. And these were a little faster and cheaper to mass produce than the Model 1927. The HAFDASA factory would build about 113,000 of these from 1938 till 1953, when it would shutter, when it would close its doors. So just about the same number as the Systema Colt. Now during World War II, about 8,000 to as many as 15,000 of these Ballester-Molina pistols were actually sold to the British for clandestine use. It's also worth pointing out that there is no real licensing or whatever for the Ballester-Molina. They just made these. Since main production was during World War II, they were pretty much left alone. There's also a rumor that these were built using the steel salvage from the German battleship Graf Spee, but this isn't true. These were built from just normal steel. And again, like I said, HAFDASA was already known for making engines, so it knew how to use steel and heat treating and all of that. They were reasonably well made. A little cruder than a 1911, but still not bad. Good serviceable .45 caliber gun. They served Argentina well, and they exported a few thousand to other friendly nations, but most of them stayed inside Argentina for military, police, or just, you know, commercial sales. But like I said, HAFDASA closed 1953. Many of these have stayed in service longer, but by the 1970s they were being phased out in favor of the high power made under license by F.M.A.P. It's worth pointing out that the 1927 stayed in frontline service longer than the Ballester-Molina for obvious reasons. For one thing, parts were easier to get for these than these when things did break down. So definitely by the 1980s, these were out of Argentinian service and were surplused out. They were either just destroyed or they were sold off as surplus, many of them winding up here in the USA. So that's about it. These are generally speaking not parts compatible with American GI mil-spec 1911 parts. There are a few things, such as the magazines, that can interchange. I've also read sometimes the barrels can be made to work. But other things like the grips absolutely do not. These are proprietary grips. Same pattern as a 1911, but a different style. The screws are in a different location. But a neat little piece of Argentinian history, I'd say. At least to me. These aren't terribly expensive today. You can still pick one up for $500–600. And they're good little .45 shooters. They are a lot like the Star, whereas the Star is in a 9mm. BM's in .45, so a little bigger, a little heavier spring, but very similar feel to the gun. Well, if you like this video, we'd appreciate it if you'd click like. Also, if you're interested in Argentinian guns, we have other videos on the Argentinian high power as well as the Systema Colt and other Argentinian guns such as their FALs and the K3 submachine gun, so on and so forth. So, interested? Check on the playlist. You'll see several other videos. We really appreciate you tuning in, and if you'd like to help support the channel, please click on the link and check out our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.